Yes, so welcome everyone to our webinar on grounding travel policies for organizations. This webinar is organized by Stay Grounded in Zeroing Flying. It is really great to we have participants all over the world. We will have a quick look later who has signed up for the webinar. And yeah, it really shows that air travel is really a crucial topic right now. More and more organizations are questioning the climate impact of their business travel. And when we try to change the travel policies, and even if we are aware of the climate impact of flying, it is sometimes hard to really insist on using grounded means of transport in our organizations if there are rules or expectations, time constraints that put pressure on us to travel by plane. So therefore, it's really important to work on changing the travel policies of organizations that we are part of. And so it becomes easier and more accepted and more of a norm to use grounded means of travel for our business travel. And especially the Corona crisis, I think, has shown us that it's actually possible to organize many events without using a plane. And it's really important to build on these experiences. And I think we will have a lot of interesting inputs in this webinar where you can see how different institutions have managed to do so. This webinar has a focus on universities. This is not a coincidence because in recent years there's a growing movement in the academic sector. In universities in Europe, in the US and Canada have increasingly become places of progressive climate-friendly travel policies. And this accumulated knowledge can actually be very helpful also for other organizations who want to think about their travel policies. So very welcome all participants in the university sector, but also from the NGO and corporation sector. Yes, I want to go over to our agenda now. I will start with a short introduction of speakers. Then I will introduce you, the participants who were so kind to fill in a survey and told us a little bit of yourselves. Then Jens Borken-Kleefeld will give an input on possibilities for organizations to reduce air travel. After that, we will have a Q&A with experiences and advice from universities in Belgium and in Norway. After that, we will focus on networks, platforms, bottom-up initiatives, and all kinds of support structures you can use if you want to change the travel policy within your organization. And then we will have a final discussion on which kind of support would you need to really get active within your organization. So who will speak today? As I said, my name is Michaela Leitner. I'm from Stay Grounded. I will tell a little bit about Stay Grounded later. And Susanne Hanger-Kopp is organizing this webinar together with me. She is from the Institute of Applied System Analysis and also working at the ETH Zurich, and is also part of Zeroing Flying, who is co-organizing this webinar. Anne Kretschmer, as I said before, will assist you in the chat when you have any questions regarding technical questions. And then the inputs we will have will be by Jens Borken-Kleefeld. He is a senior research scholar with air quality and greenhouse gases program at the Institute of Applied Systems Analysis in Luxembourg, Austria. He works on the impact assessment of traffic and is an expert in remote sensing of vehicle emissions. And he is also one part of Zeroing Flying. Then we will have an input by Kårstein Måseide. I hope I pronounced the name right. He is a senior advisor and research coordinator at the Center for Climate and Energy Transformation at the University Bergen. This center aims to provide actionable knowledge about pathways to rapid and sustainable transformation of society. And one part of this was also to change their own travel policy. So I think we can learn a lot from University Bergen there. Another input will be by Maarten Ipers. He is a project coordinator in sustainability and sustainability and mobility at the environmental department at the University of Brussels. And he can also tell a lot about what challenges there are to implement the travel policy at the university. Then regarding networks and support structures, Rosa Hofgartner will give a short input about her initiative ExPlane. Rosa is from the Netherlands, and she finished her master's in environmental policy. And she actually also sailed across the Atlantic to call for a fair and sustainable travel industry together with 35 other young Europeans. And out of this journey emerged the movement ExPlane, which she founded together with others who want to support bottom-up initiatives at universities. Yes, so these would be our speakers today. And of course, we also invite you to contribute to the discussion at various points in the presentation. Some words about Stay Grounded. For those who don't know Stay Grounded yet. Stay Grounded was founded 2016 in Vienna. It is a global network of 150 member organizations, including airport opposition and climate justice groups, NGOs, trade unions, also initiatives promoting alternatives like night trains, and also supporting communities struggling against offset projects or biofuel plantations. It aims to exchange experiences, support each other, and campaign together for a real reduction of aviation. And we are also countering offsetting emissions in biofuels and aiming at an actual degrowth of aviation. There's also a position paper you can have a look at, certain steps for a just transport system. And since last year, there's also a campaign called Let's Stay Grounded. And one part of this campaign aims specifically at supporting organizations to change and ground their travel policies. I will speak a bit more about that later. And Zeroing Flying, where Susanne and Jens are part of our partner of this Let's Stay Grounded campaign. So that was enough about us. The next question would be, who are you? So we asked you to fill in a survey, and which many of you filled in, which is really great. So we have many people from Austria here as registered participants, 23 people registered for this webinar, but also from the UK, which is great. And then followed by Germany, Spain, Denmark, Netherlands, and all other kinds of countries, not even also the US and also outside of Europe, Mexico, Philippines, and so on, and Russia. So we have a really international audience here now. What's also interesting is to see that most of you are from the university sector. So 61% are from universities and 32% from NGOs, and a small percentage from corporations. So we have a good mixture here of different types of organizations. We also asked you how you handle the topic of flying in your everyday business life and also personal life. So actually the overwhelming majority didn't use the plane at all in the last 12 months, and not even for business-related travel. And only once, and then more for personal reasons and not so many for business-related travel. So I'm not sure if this is very is representative for the whole population, but we see that that you are actually also already trying to reduce your flying when you look at these numbers. You actually also gave really great answers regarding the qualitative questions that we asked you. There were many different feelings mentioned that you associate with flying, negative ones ranging from guilt, concern, and anger. Also positive ones like excitement, adventure, social bonding, but also feelings of injustice of flying. There's a high awareness here among the participants that flying is something that's very not just, but also the fear of not being able to visit the family anymore, which lives abroad maybe. And actually the travel experience itself is also not very positively seen by many of you. Flying for work, there has been like different opinions of whether flying for work is really necessary or not necessary at all. But many agree that we really have to question the necessity of flying for work. There are also challenges that you mentioned, like to change travel policies in organizations, like expectations and norms of being a hypermobile professional or being important, being international, academic habits, which can be challenges sometimes. But also the pressure or the obligation to fly, or the fear to say no to fly if you are demanded to do so. Especially for early career researchers, this seems to be a problem sometimes. But there are, of course, also institutional barriers like travel policies in the organization that encourage flying, the international orientation of organizations, conflicting goals, EU institutions, funding rules that sort of really encourage flying, and also some kind of academic work that's like field work or project where you need first-hand information. It's really sometimes hard to deal with that without flying. Many of you actually mentioned that you have already become active in your organization, and you also implemented also some changes, but you also told of some frustration and disappointment when doing so because of a lack of awareness or commitment and so on. I could talk now much longer about this, but I can't, unfortunately. I will try to include more of the things you said in the survey in the summary you will get afterwards. Yeah, I don't want to delay the input of Jens Borken-Kleefeld any further. I would now give over to him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and very warm welcome from me also. I'm based next to Vienna, Michaela's place out in the outskirts of Vienna in Austria. I've been looking as a researcher into the problem that we do fly for meetings, for project work, for other stuff, and that this is flying into the face of what is actually the message that science comprehensively has been delivering for the past couple of 15 years or so. Namely that there is a climate crisis, and it is so big that we cannot escape, that we need fundamental reforms and transformations of our current practice. And they are so fundamental that it is not that is almost a scientific statement, nobody is exempt. It's not that some sectors have to do more than others, possibly, but all sectors have to contribute if we really want to live up to the scale of the crisis that is unfolding step by step in small pieces and erupting sooner or later. So, the society has taken this up late, but for instance, in Paris 2-3 years ago, they signed up to saying, yes, we definitely want to avoid dangerous climate change. We cannot avoid man-made climate change at all, but we want to at least avoid the worst places and try to do our utmost to keep it within some limits that we hope that we can manage. So scientific message is clear, the society support is clear. In organizations, lots of staff are highly motivated to act, and they are acting already on their own, doing their bits, as Michaela has shown for a good part of all the participants here. But they need institutional support that is not just a private ad hoc decision and a sacrifice. But we should not understate that there are others who say, no, in-person meetings cannot be replaced. Actually, the whole working of our business, of our relations, of our communication cannot be replaced purely by this, so we need to fly. And sometimes these arguments are also in an agenda that flying has something to do with status. Being senior, being more important, being perceived as such, and having privileges around this. So at the moment, the situation in lots of research organizations, universities, and also outside that with people I've spoken to is that giving up travel, giving up opportunities because you want to not to contribute more to climate change than absolutely necessary is perceived as a personal sacrifice. And it comes with the risk of losing out, with the fear of losing out. And obviously there is across organizations a resistance to change. A change to give up status, to give up things, and of course some rules. In order to move from the individual behavior to the organizational thing, we need some organizational policy and guidelines. And from the next slide on, I want to touch on a couple of issues how we can help organizations to do so. Why focus on travel may be a question. That is very clear because for many knowledge organizations, like my research organization, our travel is one of the biggest blobs of our whole carbon footprint. And I've plotted here you a pie chart so to see the distributions. And it is certainly different for other institutions, but for us it is that we have almost more than 50% of our carbon footprint is related to travel. And if you dissect this a bit, then most trips that colleagues are doing is on shorter inner European flights. So Vienna, Brussels would be typical relations. But as they are relatively short from an air travel perspective, they only have a small 1/6 of the whole carbon footprint related to travel. And the big meat, the big chunks of where the carbon footprint comes from the relatively few, 20% of all intercontinental flights, which go out to China, which go out to America, to North America and South America, which go to Japan and the African continents, because we are a globally operating research organization. While the numbers may be different for different organizations, I think the pattern is very representative, namely that lots of trips are rather on the shorter scale, and a couple of long trips are dominating the carbon footprint, which can be seen as a difficulty because they may be considered important, which can be seen as an option because it relates only to very few isolated events, possibly to things that frequent flyers in the institution are undertaking. So having said this, so scoped a little bit the issue, where's the relevance from travel and air travel in particular to the carbon footprint, and how does it come from? I could sketch 3 important components to do something about this, to introduce a climate-friendlier travel policy, in addition to the guidelines that you already have in all the organizations, namely being economical, being cost-effective, and trying to save time. So one thing can also be done being more efficient, the simplest thing, being more efficient in your air travel. So choosing direct flights if this cannot be avoided, and economy class, because in business or premium class, less people can be transported for the same amount of fuel, while in economy more. I know this will not be very pleasant for those going long distance, but this is one of the elements that can be done where one has an immediate effect. The other thing is also just common knowledge. Shift from airplanes to train travel is the essential viable alternative. And you doing so, you would easily reduce the carbon footprint of that trip by a factor of 4, if not more. And one can think about this doing this at least one way. So maybe one leg out to say to Brussels, to meetings with the European Commissions and other project partners, and the return journey backwards on the train, or vice versa. If you have a weekend in between, that's something that can be feasible, adjusted into the timescales. However, the trouble is this is only practical, one has to say, where this alternative exists in terms of physical infrastructure, which is hardly the case in many other regions of the world. And it is only feasible within a certain surplus time. So let's say within inter-European flights or for inter-European travel. Which means it is good to choose this. But if you remember the previous slide, the big chunk of the carbon footprint does not come from the short-haul flight. It comes from the intercontinental flights. So the really tough question that a travel policy needs to address, or rather a climate-friendly travel policy needs to address, is how to tackle intercontinental flights. And I think one has to be honest. There is no easy option. There is no easy choice. Once you have committed to this, you can't just say, okay, I take some different mode. You can't, because it doesn't exist. So I think the key is in the planning. The thing is to see whether you want to commit to such travel and to such work in the first place. meaning reduce the frequency of travels into the same direction if there are several projects going there. Try to do some trip chaining. And I have colleagues who had done this beautifully, in this case around Europe, and they had chained some train travels together with some holidays in southern France, while the one project meeting was in Spain and the other project meeting was in Vienna, and then they went back on train to Sweden, their home location. And this was certainly a longer trip, but given the investment for the holiday, they probably spent, it was also economical and fun for them as they reported. Having said this, if there needs to be a meeting with several people and you have the option to play around with the location, choose a central location is also a no-brainer. However, it should not be overstated. We estimated in one of our projects where we had lots of partners actually from the fringes of Europe. So we offered to host the meeting in Vienna, and so which was somewhere midway between the colleagues from Cyprus, Helsinki, and from Spain. Instead of going to the coordinator's place, which was Helsinki. But it only saves something like 20% of the carbon of the whole trips by relocating the thing. But this should be done because we should need to take the low-hanging fruits, as there is no really silver bullet, and we need to do everything we can in order to get down. The next thing would be substitute the trip if it needs to be taken by a deputy, by somebody else who is going there anyway. Why go with 2 or 3? And I've heard good examples, for instance, from, I think, Swiss Medical Society, where they often have attended important professional congresses in the United States, that they've now arranging among themselves, selecting a couple of speakers going there and reporting back to them. So only 5 people or so medics going instead of a whole bunch of 100. And of course, the thing that we are doing currently, and lots of people around the world due to the COVID crisis, substitute the trip by electronic means. If all this cannot be done, okay, maybe the option is to decline because it's not in the carbon budget. That's the hard choice. So therefore, better planning in the beginning could help avoiding this. And planning upfront means to really, really think carefully whether to engage in this kind of activity in the first place, and then if needed to arrange the work differently. Instead of doing archaeology in Far East China, maybe there are some nearer reaching places which is more easy accessible and less carbon friendly, and I think possibly equally interesting. But having all said this, can you feel the fear of losing out? I think this cannot be, we have to acknowledge that there is a problem as long as the whole conditions do not change so that many people do the same thing, namely say, no, it's not in the carbon budget. Let's organize things differently. Let's do it electronically if you need to do it far distance, and otherwise try to find other ways how to do our work to do so. Having said that about the what, the next slide would show us a little bit on the how to do it in the travel policies. And I know so far travel policies I've seen from institutions are more like bottom up and let's assemble a couple of elements that you want to do. That is certainly fine and should be done. Another way could be to have it placed as an integral part of a whole climate-friendly approach and say, let's set a target, make a pledge, or make a commitment of what is actually the ambition of ours and our contribution as researchers, as people working, as students, as private individuals, to mitigating the problem. And
Jens, you have 3 more minutes, okay?
That is perfectly in the time frame. One of the good things to take a pledge is to think about a continuous improvement of the performance. So not just, okay, I'm giving up 10% now and then the rest I'm done. No, the climate crisis requires us actually to do something like 5% less every year. So you have an ambitious target to get better and better, more efficient every year by setting it like this. Or you can formulate it, for instance, also differently, setting an absolute cap on the number of trips or the whole kilometers that you do. when you want to implement this, it needs a revision of procedures. One thing is carbon needs to be counted and monitored, and somebody needs to be responsible for this. It needs planning, and I want to say planning, planning, planning. How often, with whom, where to meet. It also means not that the permission structures and the justification needs to be there. It needs not only somebody there demanding and somebody else signing off. No, it should be a cycle of, say, bargaining about the available budget. Request alternatives to the travel, reduce the goodies for air travel and increase the incentives for train travel. Goodies with air travel are something like frequent flyer statuses and accesses, and this should not work as incentives for travel. In order to do so, yes, it needs to go beyond the organization in revising the financial and the working rules in terms of working time when you are longer on train than on air, or when it is a bit more costly to take a sleeper compartment than a cheap budget flight as it is today. But that's something where the organization needs to do and other organizations needs to come together to change the rules rise. But step by step, taking them, having the longer perspective. Last slide, Michaela. Some examples to look at would be the Zurich High School based in Switzerland, where they have organized voluntary processes and commitments bottom up by the departments, but then said, okay, you suggest this, we take you by the word, we take it now as a commitment and we evaluate, we give you resources to help so, but we evaluate and then adjust after the time. One of the early research organizations running up and having an interesting approach is the Tyndall Center in the UK, where they made bottom-up awareness raising and did set criteria for travels, made a decision and a justification tree which is voluntary, but works to change the culture so that now the organization has an inbuilt culture of, well, let's better take the train and not think about the rest without much formalities. Further examples will certainly be given in the talk, and I'm sure you have all things at hand. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jens, for this overview. I would like to remind everyone that you're welcome, obviously, to write questions in the chat, and those will be answered in writing. And obviously, everybody is invited to also contribute to answers, just as Lucy Gilliam just did. Thank you very much for posting this link. And please do post just an asterisk if you would like to ask a question. So we have sort of a good overview of who sort of raised their hands first, because that doesn't work so well with so many participants and the actual raising hands function. We will have a few minutes now for you to ask questions directly with respect to this presentation. We will then relatively quickly move on to the Q&A with our other guests, and then we will have a lot of time actually to discuss and to ask questions. So you can also, with respect to some issues that have been raised here in this presentations, ask questions later on. So are there any questions right now, or any comments or statements that you would like to make directly with respect to this overview? I will give you about a minute to post an asterisk if you would like to say something. So you've seen now an overview. Okay, Sean Pickering, please unmute yourself.
Hello, I've just unmuted. I won't put my video on just yet. Thank you very much for that. It's just a quick question about the meeting that happened in Vienna that was mentioned. I just wanted to know, that's an idea that we've sort of had before, and one of the challenges being that obviously you need a venue in that location. So if you don't have a partner in that location, your costs potentially go up quite significantly. So just to check whether that was one of the partners in Vienna, and did they offer a space, or how did you manage that side of that meeting specifically?
Thanks, Sean. Yes, indeed. It's a shipping project, so all the partners come from coastal countries, and we from YASA in Vienna are one of the only partners centrally located, binnenland, no coast. So actually, we were the central host to host all the meeting, no extra cost for this. The alternative would have been to go to Helsinki, which is clearly the furthest north point that all this partnership could go from, with people from Spain, Portugal, southern France, Greece, and Cyprus, having expanded much more travel otherwise.
Namrata, please pose your question.
Hi, this is Namrata from India. My question to you is, a lot of times in organizations, air travel is allowed by the top employees, while the lower stage employees are not allowed to fly. So any insights on how to tackle this issue of air travel being allowed only to upper scale employees?
If you are asking me, I haven't gotten a suggestion how to do it. I only would state how important it is, namely because of the symbolic value that the leadership would then also take the climate issue important.
Is there anybody else who would offer a response to that, or a situation, a way of overcome this? Unless it's our speakers who will be talking in the Q&A in a moment. Okay, we have room for maybe one more short question. Namrata, I think this is a very challenging one, by the way. You're right, because that requires changing institutional commitment and structure. If we do not have any more questions
Susanne?
right now, yes?
There was one interesting question in the chat, I think again from Namrata, whether there is evidence on the success, academic success with air travel or not. And whether it is harmful, evidence on that being harmful to have it replaced by electronic means or not attending. There's very few evidence to my knowledge on this. One study which is much cited by Wines et al. Say, no, they don't find evidence that academic success, either measured in terms of output papers or funding granted, would be well correlated with distance or number of trips or intercontinental travel. It is rather related to seniority. But if you account for seniority, it doesn't show that that traveling gives you more academic success or less academic success. So it seems to be that the notion we need to be present all the time is not well founded.
And I can see that another article has been posted in the chat, so thank you. And I hope this helps. Also another response to your question, Namrata. I will not read it out now because I would like to watch the time, and we would like to finish this meeting on time and yet get as much program in it as possible. So we will now talk to representatives of two universities, the University of Bergen in Norway and the Vrije Universiteit in Brussels in Belgium. I have Maarten, Ipers and Kårstein Måseide here with me, and they are both from institutions who have experiences with implementing travel policies. And we suggest the following procedure. I will ask them a few initial questions so that they can outline the kind of institutional structures they come from and sort of the processes they implemented. And we will then very soon open up for questions from the audience so that we can enter into a discussion if you like. Thank you so much for both of you to join us here for this webinar. I would like to start with Maarten, simply because he's first on the slide. which was by no means giving any priority to anybody. And I hope that then Kårstein can sort of respond also comparatively to Maarten's first answer. And that is, we would like to know from you how you get this process started of designing and implementing a sustainable air travel policy, and in what kind of sort of institutional structure have you been doing it? Because I think this is important for others to relate to what you have been doing so far.
Right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the introduction. And also thank you to Jens for the very nice presentation with a lot of elements that were very recognizable. With regards to how the process started, the Vrije Universiteit Brussels, to give you an idea, has about 15,000 students and 2,500 staff members. And actually, the travel policy began with bottom-up initiatives from researchers and departments who started to implement their own travel policies on compensations, on the amount of travels they do per year, on taking the train on short distances. On the other side, from the central administration of the university, we are doing for several years the monitoring of our CO2 emissions, and we do a lot of awareness raising on these CO2 emissions, and 15% of our yearly CO2 emissions are from flights. So it's a bit less than Jens stated in his carbon footprint in his previous presentation, but still it's 15. And in the last strategic plan of the VUB, they stated that the VUB wants to lower its CO2 emissions. So with all these elements together, we were ready for a central university-wide travel policy that has been approved in 2019. The travel policy has an ABC principle. Firstly, focused on avoiding traveling. This is a lot of awareness raising on the alternatives for by meetings via Zoom, or for instance, or do Skype meetings. To ask people if it's always necessary to take an airplane before they start flying. The second part is to book an alternative on short distances. You have to take a plane, the train at our university if you get there by overground in less than 6 hours. And the third element is to compensate the CO2 emissions of your flights. And currently we are in the phase of the implementation of a framework agreement with a travel agency. This agency will arrange all VUB business trips following our travel policy. They will directly compensate the flights, and they will report on the flights and the compensations and the trains that they have booked over the previous period. That's how we are doing now for the moment.
Thank you. So you've come a long way. When was it exactly that you started this process? How many years have you been working on it?
It started before I was at the university, because I'm there for 3 years in my position at the environmental department. The first monitoring was of flights and their CO2 emissions was in 2013 with my colleague supporting a student who was doing his master thesis on this. So it started already in 2013, and in 2019 the travel policy was approved. So it's been quite a journey.
And so there is a budget and sort of a structure to coordinate these efforts and to, put in the time that it takes for the organization.
Yeah, we have a sustainability core group where I'm part of, and together with the finance department, we are arranging this framework agreement. Also, if you look at budget, there's a lot of now. A lot of people had their own travel agency where they book their flights independently, and it gives a lot of extra work for the financial department. So actually, budget-wise, it's going to be cheaper probably for the big, because it's going to be all automatically the administration with the connection between our finance department and the travel agency.
So by now there have been fundamental institutional changes to accommodate this kind of travel policy.
That's a phase that we're in for this summer, actually.
Okay, interesting. Thank you so much for this first overview. Kårstein, may I ask you to also give us a bit of an overview?
Thank you, and thanks for the great introductions by the others. I think we also really recognize a lot of the thoughts that we've been going through. I'm coming from the University of Bergen in Norway, and we are similar sized, I think, to Maarten's University in Brussels. We have a fairly new research center called the Center for Climate and Energy Transformation. And the whole purpose of this center is really to work about how to make the transformation of society to mitigate climate change. This center was established in 2017, and when I came to the center, the university had no travel policy, and the center was newly established and didn't have a travel policy either. And if you looked around, you would see that there were some dedicated people around, and then there was lots of flying around. So a few people, I think the initiation of the whole thing was that a few people started thinking, first by themselves, and then gradually finding other like-minded people and started discussing this issue. Shouldn't we walk the talk? Don't we need to do something about our own research practices? So after a while, we established a little working group at our center. And the center counts about 20 people working physically at it, and we are a network of about 60 researchers within the university. So we started developing a travel policy. The first thing we did was to look at others, and the Tyndall policy has been presented here, and we looked a lot to what they had been doing and modified it. We saw an opportunity in a lot of the travels, either ourselves going to meetings or us organizing conferences. We thought this is something that is really within our own control. We can do something about it. So we developed a policy with two purposes. One was to reduce our own emissions, and the second was to develop something that could be shared with others to inspire others, the way we have been inspired by the Tyndall Center. We never got to the full ABC as Maarten did. We stayed with the A, but instead we focus on 4 A's in our policy. And the first one was awareness raising. We realized that probably most people don't know how big their emissions are. They probably don't even know how many flights they take and what that translates to into CO2 emissions. Secondly, it's of course important to provide alternatives. You need to find other ways to work to be efficient, whether it's substituting travels by other means of transport, whether it's more video meetings, combining meetings, things that others here have talked very well about. And thirdly, over time, it's important to be accountable. It's important to set targets and also measure the emissions and be able to report that publicly. So we developed this also within certain limitations, because in a sense we can't really restrict people from traveling either. That needs to come from the institutional level, and there are governmental regulations who dictate what people can and cannot do. So we took a more voluntary approach, focusing on these issues, and really the 4th A, which is, we were cheating a bit, we call it A, visible culture change, really working on the culture and the dialogue around this. Then we also developed a few tools. One was that we developed a carbon calculator for our network, and many people have done that before, but what we focused on was this cumulative thinking, that people could actually get an overview of the total emissions from their travels. preferably before they even go there, so that there is an element of planning and prioritizing, combining meetings, and actually choosing not to go to certain meetings. And the second element was that we also wanted to look at when we invite people into the university, when we host a conference, that's also something that's within our control and that we can take measures to reduce. A few of the things that I think has really come out of this is, well, of course, we had to invest a bit in video facilities and so on. But I think just having this policy in hand has been an excellent tool for us to start discussing this with other institutions, sharing experiences, participating in public debates and so on. And one thing that we also could do was to experiment with low carbon solutions. So for instance, last autumn, we hosted a conference in Bergen, and we decided that at least we're going to try to prevent people flying from Oslo to Bergen, which is a 1 hour flight, but there is a train that takes 7 hours. So we rented a car wagon at the end of the train, and we offered free travel, an opportunity to mingle and get to know each other, and we had a scientific program on the train. So really to try to incentivize and make this fun also. We also hosted a virtual hub at a conference, and we thought that was very novel, but after COVID-19, I think we have experienced that now almost everything can be done by video. So, but only half a year back, it seems more difficult. The final thing I maybe want to mention is that our timing was fairly good, because when we had our travel policy for our little center ready, at the time there was a lot of writing, not least in academic newspapers, but also in the media in general, about academic travels. Our rector was put up there saying that his carbon footprint was the worst of all the rectors in our country. We had the climate strike, so there was a lot of attention coming around this, and I think the university centrally realized that we have to do something about it. They had a stated goal of being climate neutral by 2030, but the plans underneath that was not in place. So during the year of 2019, the university made a lot of measures to get better data on the emissions, both from travels, but also procurement and other things. And then they really also looked to our policy and our guidance in terms of how to shape such a policy. And one of the most important measures that were put in place was that they set an annual emission reduction target, so a carbon budget. So 10% reduction per year, not only a goal into the future, but an annual budget.
I'm muted. Thank you, Kårstein. Now you can hear me. This is really impressive. So it's clear that it takes a while to get to the high level, apparently. So we've heard now from two bottom-up initiatives. So how long would you say was the process until sort of the top-down efforts came in? And
well, I think we started around early 2018 at our center. But I think the process is by far not ended yet. I think there is a lot of work still to be done and get the better data on the emissions. And there is a lot of work still to be done in terms of how to implement this on an institutional level. What does this mean on unit level? How are we going to distribute carbon budgets within the organization? And so on. A lot of that has not been worked out yet. So in that sense, I think some of the others here have come a bit further than we have.
Thank you. I do have a few more prepared questions, but I would like, since there's already one question posted in the chat, maybe to start opening this up and see what the questions are that come in. And then if we see we have some that haven't been answered, then we might post them in the end. Binta Getzinger wrote down a question. I said we would only answer them in writing. Would you like to raise the question for the audience? Because I think it is very interesting and very practical. I'm sorry, you're fairly difficult to understand. I don't know if everybody has the same experience, but I can't really hear you. Is it okay if I read the question?
Me right now. Do you understand me?
Yes. Now it's good.
My question is to both members of these universities, Brussels and Bergen. How exactly is the accounting and monitoring done? As a member of University of Brussels or Bergen, do I know at the end of the year how many flight kilometers I have consumed? How many greenhouse gases did I emit by flying? So do I have an individual monitoring and how is the accounting and monitoring done on the university level? Because without proper, and we heard it already, without proper accounting and monitoring, we don't really know how we fly, so to speak, if our strategy really works.
Yeah, I can respond. It's a very good question, and also Jens has stated that measuring and monitoring is very important. And this is also one of the reasons why we really want to start working with a central travel agency who can collect all the data for us now. Because momentarily we are using a very time-consuming way to get our data, and it's from the accounting system. So based on the payments for all the flights done and all the business trips done at the VUB, we get a large Excel where we can see which mode of transport was used, and in the description it's stated where the destination was. These data are not perfect, that's sure, but it's a very, very good estimation. But yeah, it's not 100% correct, but we don't have any better data. With regards to our carbon footprint, we use the bilan carbone from a French agency in order to calculate our total carbon footprint. And yeah, that's the method that we use also to for the amount of kilometers flying. And we also include radiative forcing when we calculate our CO2 emissions, because there's also some discussion on that within our university, but we include radiative forcing.
Yeah, I can maybe supplement from the University of Bergen. I mean, the calculator that we made has only been offered to individuals, so more around the awareness raising approach. The university centrally, I think the best data so far is based upon the travel reimbursements. But I think that is still work that has to be done. I mean, there is one challenge is simply that people are, if you only take the data for the travel agency, then not everyone uses the travel agency. So there are really some efforts that needs to be made in terms of having complete data sets. And what I have seen of data is that they have changed quite substantially over the past years, and that probably more reflects that the method of counting is improving. And as I said, in terms of how to distribute this and allocate the measures on units and individuals, that is still not worked out. The travel policy has an overall statement that on average the emission should be reduced by 10% per year per unit and individual, but exactly how to distribute that has not been worked out. And one of the mechanisms that has been discussed is to have some sort of climate fund, but again, the design of that is still not in place yet.
Thank you. We have a question from Wolfram Möbius.
Hello, I actually have two short questions. One is, they're both to Maarten. The first one is, how did you decide how to offset? Because there are many different options. How did you set your benchmark, your constraints? And the other one is, did you manage to find a travel agency that can deal with more complex train journeys, international tickets, yeah, you know, like getting the significant savings by knowing the tricks. Did you find such a travel agency? Thank you.
All right, thank you for your questions. On the first question, there was a lot of debate at our university on using an internal or an external fund for compensation, because we wanted to go for an external fund, but completely, but not everybody agreed. So while we are going step by step, as Jens said, you have sometimes to make concessions. So we provide external funds for compensation that are only gold standard, so that they have a gold standard mark. And then for internal funds, we're going to launch a call after 1 year to see what we will do with that. It is going to go to sustainable research, or like, for instance, or more technical hardware installations that we don't know yet. For your second question on the difficult train journeys, before we sent out our tender, we did we questioned the market, like the biggest players on there, and there was they're not focused on trains yet, we noticed. So but they get the question more often, also from other Flemish universities, which we cooperate strongly with. So now we are asking these questions, and that is really important for us, and they are going to work on it to make this possible, also for online tool, for instance, because now they're mainly focused on flights. And we really stated in our tender that that we want the possibility to have trains, also low budget trains that are popping up in Europe. But still, there's progress to be made by the market of the travel agencies itself. But it was something that we included in our tender. Susanna, you're muted.
Thank you. I've been so focused on looking up the questions. We have actually the same question by two people, and I will just read it in that case. What factor do you use for radiate forcing? I guess it goes to both speakers.
This is I don't know by heart the answer to that, because it's an external calculator we use from ADME, from a calculation tool. So I don't know by heart.
Okay.
Yeah, we are also using data from Vestlandsforskning, and if I recall, I think maybe the figure is something slightly less than 2, but again, we haven't worked that out ourselves.
If you take a look at the chat, some colleagues offered also some answers from the universities of Edinburgh and Sheffield. So please follow there as well. And thank you so much for offering answers. We did intentionally invite people who have experience with travel policies that are not officially on the panel, but we do hope that the discussion will open. So if there are answers from other institutions, please bring them in. This is what we're here for, to exchange as much as possible information as well. I hope these answers were useful. We have another question from Sarah Foster.
Hello, thank you all so much for your insights. I wanted to ask again about the question of offsets, which is coming from the perspective of people trying to get the administration to make a policy. How do we avoid people sort of latching on to the idea of offsets as a get out of jail free card and sort of focusing on that? And particularly, I'm thinking about in my university, the university is attempting to develop an internal offset scheme, and all of the stuff they're doing under that program is stuff they should do anyway and would probably have to do anyway to hit their climate goals. So using that as a carbon offset for flights just feels sort of disingenuous. Thanks.
Yeah, I completely agree. But we also think that if you do like an internal fund, that it is not a compensation anymore. But in order to get our travel ABC working, we had to make a concession, and along the way we're going to monitor what people choose. We also communicate on that it's not a real compensation, and also agree that these are things that the university should do from themselves. So yeah, but unfortunately we are offering both.
Yeah, we have also, I agree, and we have tried to bring the message across that we should really discuss the real emission cuts at the university, and those should be the substance of the emission cuts. And that's my understanding, that's how they interpret it. And my understanding is that having an internal fund is maybe more about distributing what is left. But again, we will see how that plays out.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to offer a response to this comment? Okay. Then I have.
This is Jens. If
Yes.
I may, my experience is offsetting is desired by senior people who don't want to give up their habits. It's a cheap way, relatively cheap way, to get rid of some guilt and pretend to do something. And it runs into all the problems of the financial rules, whether you're allowed to spend the money anyway. If you really want to use financial incentives as a way to change behavior, then the price for the carbon that you need to account for is far, far higher than the market price, which is currently in the order of whatever, 10, 20 euros per ton carbon abated. So this would be the amount of the range that you add on a ticket within Europe. So this wouldn't change any travel behavior. If you want to change travel behavior, you have to slap much, much higher sums there. Then you run into much bigger problems with finance and with senior people saying, hey, why should I waste the money on travel and not invest into proper research?
Thank you, Jens. I have Sean Pickering next on my list.
Hi, just another question about the data, and I suspect actually you've already answered it in the tools that you use to work out the emissions. I just wondered if your countries have standardized figures for emissions. So in the UK, we have what we refer to as the DEFRA factors often, which give like a standardized emission factor. I just wondered if other countries have them as well.
If those of you who know that there's a standardized factor could just post it also in the chat, it would be nice to collect this information. Just write the country down. We are collecting all of the links, etc., from the chat as well to share with you then in the sort of webinar debrief. So you don't have to make sure you copy everything that you find interesting.
With regards to the question, in Belgium there is no standards, but we use like the renowned again like the bilan carbon method of ADME, who is pretty renowned, but there's no Belgian standard.
Kårstein, are there any?
I don't know that. I mean, certainly Statistics Norway, they published the official emission statistics, but otherwise whether there is a standard, I'm not that sure of. But maybe I should just make one comment, and that is, when we made our internal calculator, there was a lot of, we had to do some trade-offs between accuracy and elements that we wanted to highlight. And we really chose to focus on not having the maybe most precise numbers, because that would require a lot of details around the trips that we wouldn't necessarily have at our unit level, but rather focus on the issues around awareness, around priority setting, planning, and so on. So that was one of the discussions that we had internally. And so we don't have a perfect tool. Maybe the figures are a little bit offset, but you certainly maybe it's more important to target the high emitters or to bring down the number of travels rather than having the perfect precision on each travel. And I think it was interesting to see the poll for this webinar that, I mean, it's certainly preaching to the choir in the sense that we have almost everyone here has been on the plane 0 or 1 time in the last year. And for instance, if you look at the data from University of British Columbia that I think Jens referred to, what they found among their staff was there was a huge heterogeneity in the number of trips taken. So you have very few people taking a large number of trips, and I think they had about 1/3 who didn't travel at all. So in a sense, it's also important to discuss which groups are we actually targeting.
Thank you. I have another question from Anna and then one by Wolfram. So Anna, maybe you go first.
Yeah, it's not a question, it's a bit late now maybe, but it's just a short comment on the offsetting. I mean, as Michaela said in the beginning, when Stay Grounded, we're quite critical on offsetting, so I won't go into too much into details here, but actually I think it's quite critical to state the problems of offsetting and find also within travel policies alternatives to it. That means if you want to try to have like financial solution in a way of making the travel by flight higher than train travel, I think it would be really good not to go the standard way of offsetting, but to find other ways to use the money to support people that would take the train and to change the to direct the finance towards supporting people who take other modes of transport. So you don't go into the illusion that offsetting is actually possible, because yeah, it's there, even within the gold standard, it's quite questionable whether this is actually possible.
Thank you, Anna. Another question from Wolfram Möbius.
Sorry, I forgot my question. That's really embarrassing.
You can just write it down whenever you think of it. We will also collect any questions that might not have been answered for the debrief.
I remember this. Okay. Apologies, very embarrassing. So one concern I have been thinking about this is the amount of external funders, or the amount of external or money coming to funders. Have those of you who implemented travel policy gotten any pushback on that you can't use funder monies, which are not the most economical solution, for example?
I don't know if I understood it completely, but it was a question: how do external funds cope with compensation, or?
So did you have the following hypothetical problem, that research is funded by the funding agency, which is not the university, and you tell the researcher you should take the train for a city which is less than 6 hours, but there exists a flight which is cheaper, then you might potentially, this might be hypothetical and not be a problem at all, which would be great, but you could be in the conflict of the funder rules saying you have to choose the cheapest option, and the university rules which says you can't.
No, I haven't heard anything about that, but an interesting example I can give in Flanders is that because all the 5 universities are implementing a travel policy, we sat together with the Flemish Research Fund, who is a big funder of research at the universities. And after all the universities, they also adopted a travel policy, so to stimulate taking the train on short distances in their policy. So that's a huge step we took with the research funds, because there were always lots of questions. Are these compensation eligible costs for the funds? So we went in dialogue with the different funds, and some of them are taking over the travel policies. So they're not making any problems of taking the train.
I can also comment from the Norwegian side, because this is actually regulated by the government. So for governmental organizations, the regulation says that you should travel in the cheapest and fastest possible way, but you should also give concern to environmental issues. Meaning that if you have a really long and expensive train ride, it is in conflict with the regulation. And that has been a problem. At our center, we have tried to set aside our own funding to really support those who are willing to take a train or need an overnight train and so on, even though it's more expensive. But actually, at some point, we also have the problem getting that approved, because it's simply in violation with the current regulations. So I think that's one of the institutional things that has to be changed, and where universities and others have to push towards the government.
Can I also respond to the thing that Anna said? One of the possibilities we're also thinking about is to use the internal fund to fund people who take a train, to support them financially who choose to take a train, although it's more expensive than the flight. So that's also one of the options. And with regarding to compensation, yeah, the first thing in our travel policy is to try to avoid traveling, indeed, and not we're not focusing on compensation neither. Our focus is indeed on raising awareness on why you should not fly or should not fly too often, and to be sure that there are alternatives and that everybody knows them and knows how to use them. That's something that the COVID crisis now is going to change the academic world a lot, I think, as well.
Thank you. I have at the moment no further. Oh, here, Sarah Foster. I do have.
Hi. Sorry, it's me again. I was just, Maarten, you just mentioned the COVID crisis and the potential benefits that this might have for trying to do something about this issue right now. But what I've noticed in my department right now is that everyone's so busy trying to set up research labs for social distancing that no one is willing to think about anything other than the sort of immediate situation. And when we try and bring up any other issues, it's thought of as sort of an annoyance that is impeding the ongoing work of the department. So I was wondering if anyone could sort of speak to that or offer any advice on how to address these sorts of issues at this time when there's a lot of opportunity, but then people are also maybe resistant to taking on new things or having any additional changes.
I think this is a question to everyone.
So if I understood the question correctly, it is more about undertaking these questions around having policies, implementing policies, putting all these measures in place for the long term. Is that correct? Or yeah.
Yeah. Because there's an opportunity, because we're having virtual seminars, virtual symposiums, etc., to try and keep that in place. However, there's no sense that at least the leadership in my department is willing to even consider the possibility of these sorts of policy changes right now, because they're so distracted by other things. It's just not thought of as something important, but rather another annoyance.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult to know exactly what will happen after COVID. I mean, to one extent, this is being discussed to a lesser extent. At the same time now, at least at our university, which has for some time been completely shut down and is slowly reopening, I think what we have really learned from this is that it is possible to work offline. And I think one of the things I wanted to pick up from what Jens said in his presentation, this fear of missing out. Maybe one reason why this has worked so well to work by virtually during COVID is exactly because everyone is in the same situation. So I think it is critical what we do when we start reopening the universities. Are we going back to physical meetings where we don't offer the opportunities for video and so on? If so, I think we are really missing out a great opportunity. And I think we have all experienced some of the positive benefits of working more virtually. For instance, I think we have expanded our network, people attending our seminars and so on. Before we had to come physically, now we have a national and international participation weekly. So to really try to keep those benefits and facilitate those in the future is important.
If I may add to that, Sarah, I do think that that's a really difficult question also to if people are not listening. And I think there's a lot of people have made the same experience, that they're sort of, trying to change somebody, but there's just the key people in certain positions are just not open to that kind of change. And I'm afraid that I've talked to a lot of people at different universities about the processes that they've implemented. And so far, the only way that they've overcome this was that they were ready with input at a time when either this position was newly like the people changed, or there was some kind of window of opportunity, some very crucial event, etc. And they were ready to have something that they could say, okay, now we do this. And I've not come across any other way to really do that, and to in the meantime work on the critical mass, getting more people asking for it. I think that's yeah. I see that.
If I can, I also agree on that. You see that it changes if there's a window of opportunity. It's also something that Kårstein said. Like there's a lot of climate attention. The other universities are doing it. But indeed, on a top level, the decision has to be made in order to change the whole institution. And at the bottom level, it helps if you enable people to show them how you can easily take the train around Europe, how you can compensate, what other possibilities there are to avoid flying. But indeed, for the institution-wide change, you need like the top level to take the decision.
Okay, we have only 5 more minutes for this section of our webinar, but I think it was really productive and we had very diverse questions. Also, Sarah, I would like to point out to the comment from our colleague Wolfram Möbius, who offered a process that has worked for them apparently. And I would like to take the last 5 minutes to ask our speakers for 2 very short statements each. And one is sort of, what do you think was the key moment in your process where, where something important or something crucial happened that made things better in the process, or that you think was really important? And the other thing is, what is the most important advice that you would give people if that isn't directly related? So what would you ask them to or tell them to do if they are just at the beginning of such a process? Maybe Kårstein starts this time, and then Maarten. And I ask you to keep it very short.
I think it's possible to. I think we have we have seen experiences here with bottom-up approaches, and that's a place you definitely can start. We were maybe fortunate with the timing, in the sense that when we had a policy ready, then we had a leadership who did not have one, and there was pressure from outside to do something. And of course, we couldn't know exactly when that was going to happen, but at least we had something to bring to the table for discussions and also tools. And even if that had not happened, I think what we have benefited in terms of being able to share this with other departments, with other institutions nationally and internationally, has been really a great experience for us. So we are learning a lot and we are sharing a lot with others. So starting bottom up, I think that is you should just go ahead and do it. But of course, to make the institutional change, you need the leadership and you need the leadership commitment.
Thank you, Kårstein. Maarten.
Yeah, in that way, for us, the key moment was that in the strategic plan of the VUB, they want to lower their CO2 emissions and want to become climate neutral in 2050. And we monitor our carbon footprint, and business trips are a big part of that. So they had to act on it. And for advice, indeed, it's about creating awareness and creating a critical mass in your university, because sometimes the people who are shouting the loudest are the people who are against changes sometimes. So you can also show the top management there that a lot of people are also wanting a change, for instance. So.
Thank you. And may I just ask one, because we have another couple of minutes, one short follow-up question. You said that the crucial moment was when you had in your strategic plan the objective, the target to become carbon neutral. Do you know how that got in there?
We put it in there, but it was because we had a new rector, and sustainability was one of the 4 transversal elements that was going throughout the whole strategic plan. And we have written our vision on radically sustainable in university, and one element was to become climate neutral in 2050, and they agreed on that. But it was also because it was one of the most important things for the rector. So.
Okay, so but this was also the personality thing, right? So you had a good person, or a good person saying a person that for whom it was important.
Yeah, and she got re-elected. So for us, for our university, it's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Can I add a comment quickly?
Yes,
because
very quickly.
University Bergen also had a goal. I think it was becoming carbon neutral by 2050. And then we have a national sustainability conference. And our rector was asked by a student representative from the audience during that conference about this goal. And I think if I recall this correctly, he kind of changed it almost right then and there and said, no, it has to be 2030. Okay. So then, you never know when what is pushing the goal to change, and then whatever has to come underneath that to support it comes later.
Thank you so much for this final statement. I think this is really good advice, put people on the spot in some kind of public setting that actually probably might help sometimes. And this is a really good moment to move on to our next part of the webinar, which is about resources. And we've chosen to highlight one fairly new resource, especially, and I think this relates very much to one of the key advice that we just heard about, and that is creating a critical mass and doing bottom-up work. And I would like to invite Rosa to now introduce briefly the initiative ExPlane, which is doing exactly that.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, exactly. I think the link is pretty clear. Yeah, we set up a network. It's called ExPlane, to really mobilize the critical mass. So it's not really about making concrete measures or proposing very concrete policy proposals, but it's really about getting those policy proposals that sometimes take several years to get implemented to accelerate this process. So it's not really about, or we already talked about the why, but now it's really about, okay, how can we do this as fast as possible? But before I want to explain what ExPlane is, I think it's interesting to tell a bit about how this came about. Michaela already quickly introduced me, and here you can see on the picture, I was on this sailing ship together with 35 other young environmentalists from all over Europe. And we went all the way from Amsterdam. We were supposed to go to Chile, to the climate conference, the UN climate conference, COP25. And we wanted to do this in a rather symbolic way, not by flight, but on a sailing ship. And this was a campaign to raise awareness on the climate impacts of flying. But we also used the 80 days on the ocean to think about solutions to make the travel industry more fair and sustainable. And for this, we had several partners we worked with that also gave us cases to think about. And one of the partners was Wageningen University. And this really made us think about education itself, how we can educate people about climate emergencies and the impact of travel, but also about the travel behavior of universities and schools themselves. And one of the solutions we came up with is ExPlane. And here you can see what we made during our time on the ocean. It's basically a package that allows people to start their own local campaign at their school or university if they don't agree with the travel behavior or the travel policy. And it's very DIY here because we made it without internet and hardly any computers. But the idea was already pretty clear. We wanted to make a very concrete toolkit that is accessible to everyone. To start your own movement at your own university. And this is kind of based or inspired by, for example, the fossil-free movement or Extinction Rebellion. They all have some quite concrete steps you can take to build your own campaign. And rather than being an alternative way to change the travel policy at your university, it's more supplemental. So I think we already talked about how long this process can take, and with ExPlane we want to accelerate this process. So ExPlane, if you go to the next slide. So ExPlane is in the end an umbrella organization that connects all the students and staff that want to change the university's travel policy. And we basically want to help people that want to change, but also share good practices and inspiration for other groups. So we, for example, so the whole toolkit is online now. And there are several steps. So for example, there are ideas for creative actions, but also more focused on how you can keep a group running or start a group, how to organize a dialogue night on this topic. Or we're in the process of making posters and stickers, and all of this can help people to build a momentum and to raise more awareness on this topic. So in the end, the change will go faster. If you go to the next slide again. So I already mentioned some of the things like creative actions, but we also want people to, for example, start petitions. But we are already in the process of talking to several groups at universities, and some of these are professors and others are student groups. So we really want to focus on both students and staff. And other ideas are, for example, that we talked about, an idea that we really liked is a prize that was given to the student organization that organized the most sustainable student trip of the organization. So there's a whole spectrum of ideas, and we already covered a lot of measures that can be taken on an institutional level. But I think with these kind of fun actions and fun prizes and ways to make the topic more accessible, I think we can really reach or increase this critical mass that we talked about before. Another idea that a professor gave to us is to suggest very specific thesis proposals to also engage more students that sometimes struggle to find concrete thesis topics, to really connect the research that they do during their curriculum to the campaign. So in the end, people can use the numbers that people research during this thesis in the campaign for ExPlane. And right now, we just finished the toolkit, or we made a first version, but it's still work in progress. So we're very open for any feedback. So if you have any, feel free to say something or send us an email. So yeah, we only exist for like a month or two. And for the following months, we just want to connect and increase the network. And I think our goal is to at least engage 10 different groups at 10 different schools and universities in the coming year, and collect as many good practices as possible. So also a question to you is whether you have any ideas still to add to the toolkits, and also if you are interested to join, or if you have good examples, we're very keen on showing them on our website. So yeah, feel free to send us an email.
Thank you, Rosa. This is excellent, and I think this is an excellent resource and platform to spread among your colleagues and among your students. Are there any questions for Rosa? It was an extremely clear presentation, I have to say. So I wonder what kind of exact questions it leaves open, or any suggestions. Obviously, you can reach her also after this event. This is where there are contact information and a link in the presentation that we will also send around. Okay. Time is running short, so I will not give you a lot of time to think of questions. But thank you very much, Rosa, for your presentation. This has been excellent insight and a really good story to tell. And even though you haven't existed for that long, I mean, you have already a whole bunch of resources. And with resources, we will continue. Sonia Perez, are you around?
Hello, yes, I am.
Excellent. Would you like to say a couple of sentences about this excellent resource that you've created?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for the time. So these resources, the Travel Better package, was produced by myself and EAUC Scotland, which is an organization that supports Scottish universities and colleges in advancing sustainability. And it was funded by the University of Edinburgh and the University of Strathclyde. And so the package it has 3 resources and posts and interviews with academics. And the point is that it really asks users and academics and those working in the sector to reflect on air travel. And so it's not really asking anyone to stop air travel, because I mean, I'm quite international, and so I understand how personal air travel is, but it really asks you to just reflect on why we actually want to travel and what that means, and also what that means for equity and diversity. And so I'll just quickly end with a novel resource in the package is an air travel justification tool. And what this is it's a self-scoring tool that academics or anyone really can use to justify a flight. So I find that a lot of the times we want to go to a meeting, but it might not actually be that beneficial. So this tool will help you gauge the benefits, and if you have to go, then it will help you sort of plan for the future where you might not have to go. And so that's a novel aspect of it. And so I hope you all take a look, and I hope it's helpful for all of you. Thank you.
Good. You're welcome. Thank you so much, Sonia. The title is actually a link. Now I would like, this is another resource from the UK, invite Sean Pickering from the University of Edinburgh to say a few things about his platform.
Hello, thank you very much. So yeah, just very quickly, the Roundtable is an online network of currently 99 different higher education institutions from all around the world. And the design really is to share knowledge and ideas and data. So when it was set up, a lot of institutions were maybe starting to look at business travel in higher education, and a lot of them, as we've heard today, actually are doing very similar work, but hadn't really discussed it with anybody else. It was very hush-hush. So this brings together lots of different organisations, and it's open to anybody in the higher education sector that's looking at business travel in their institution. And the other sort of big thing about the roundtable is it shows it's a test centre for developing sort of a virtual first network, really. Because if we can't do it, and we're the experts in trying to reduce air travel in higher education, then how can we ask our colleagues to do the same? So yeah, if anybody wants to have a look, obviously the link is not on the slide just there, or drop me a message to chat about it further. But yeah, thank you very much for today as well. It's been really, really useful to hear other experiences.
Thank you, Sean. I put here some links to my own institution, the Swiss Federal Institute. Now I can't even say it. Let's call it ETH Zurich, which has a very long process of establishing also sustainable travel, air travel policy behind it, and this is still going on, and there's a whole list of very excellent resources on the website. And I would also like to point out this map that is actually not part of the official resources, I think, but my colleague Agnes Kreil has put together, which is just an overview of institutions who have sustainable air travel policies in place. And it's an open project, and everybody's invited to, put in their institutions or any institutions they are aware of. Most knowledge here is still centered in Europe, but we're happy to go abroad and collect information for all over the world. So it's easy to find, examples and best practices. We can post. Oh, Agnes is here. Thank you, Agnes. You want to say one sentence? I didn't see you in the.
Thank you. I'm just going to say thanks for all the amazing presentations. I was trying to update the map as I usually do while I listen to things like this, but it's always possible that I get things wrong. And of course, things happen at the institutions, and I can't keep track of everything. So if you know something, a project going on somewhere and it's not on the map yet, or it's outdated, then please update it or send me a message and I will update.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for saying hello. I was looking for you in the list and I didn't see you, so I just said a few words myself. Okay, Michaela, we can move on in the list. We have put a bunch of other platforms and resources we know about right here. There is Flying Less, which is a blog on flying less in academia from Tufts University. A resource guide, Flying Less in Academia, by Ryan Katz-Rosine and colleagues. A symposium on reducing academic flying by the Carbon Neutral University Network, and obviously the Scientists for Future network that has been created as a response to the Fridays for Future movement. And we would really welcome it if you helped us, adding your own resources, whatever you would like to contribute, to point out, to highlight in terms of available knowledge. And if we have a few minutes, if somebody would like to highlight something right now. We've had an interesting conversation going on in the chat also about a whole bunch of different campaigns going on. So hold on, there's a question that's being highlighted. And we'll come to that in 1 minute. Is there anybody who would like to offer a resource right now? Then now's the time to speak up. If not, feel free to post it in the chat. We will collect it and add it to the webinar debrief. So, okay, I'd also be interested in Mark Redmond's question. What was Mark Redmond's question? Would you like to pose your questions out? We have a few more minutes. Mark.
Hi. Yeah, sorry, that was quite unexpected.
Sorry for putting you on the spot. You don't have to.
First of all, thanks for a really fabulous webinar. I really appreciate this. Just to explain, I'm not in the university sector. I'm a micro enterprise, a freelance consultant sitting in Romania, but we're very active in the Horizon 2020 research program. And it occurs to me that one of the most direct ways of actually influencing travel behavior would be to introduce clear, very well-defined criteria, a selection criteria into the funding programs. Particularly in the context of EU-funded programs, I think given that there is clearly a convergence between a clear European commitment to reducing carbon footprint plus the dispersal of large amounts of research funding, I think there's a potential convergence there. And I think also there's a lot of scope for building a targeted lobby, not necessarily from outside, but from inside. There are a significant number of universities and also non-academic beneficiaries who are working on the inside of these programs, who are existing beneficiaries, who have day-to-day contact with project officers in the research executive agency, and could be clearly articulating and building a lobby based on their own experience and based on their own commitment to make much more effective and sustainable use of the resources that we're benefiting from. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think this is a really excellent point. And we have a lot of backing up comments in the chat, and we will definitely put this on our campaign agenda discussions and follow up on this. We don't have, unfortunately, more time to discuss this right now, but thank you for making this point and stating it publicly. Now I'll hand over back to Michaela to present our last resource on the list.
Yes, hello everyone again. I just want to quickly present the Let's Take Grounded campaign and also the platform we are building up also for organizations that hopefully will also be useful for you. Just one quick sentence about the campaign as a whole. It rests on 4 different pillars. On one hand, we want to address individuals who decide to stay grounded themselves voluntarily, that maybe sign a pledge or that inform themselves on how to travel differently. We also focus on political demands that are of course important too, like the kerosene tax, or we also had a bailout campaign recently. And we also want to encourage people to get active in the local context. For example, if there are airport expansion projects in their region. And the 4th pillar, of course, will focus and does focus on organizations. And this I want to present you quickly. So it has 3 different parts right now, but it will expand with time. One would be more resources on how to change my organization's travel policy. We have a survey, which can also be like kind of a guide for you if you want to know about travel policies that you could implement in your organization. And we also want to highlight examples of grounded organizations. So all kinds of universities, NGOs, or corporations that are already doing something and showing that there's actually a lot of things happening right now and a lot of inspiration that people can gain from that. To look at the resources more closely, we have resources for universities like platforms. We have links to concrete travel policies of universities that might be helpful. Also to grassroots initiatives. The part on NGOs and corporations is still very small, so we are very happy also about hints from you if you have some. And of course, it was mentioned before, travel policies of funding in public institutions, so initiatives that try to change these funding policies, which are very often are a challenge to overcome for organizations. And of course, a part on organizing virtual conferences, which will also expand in the next month, because this is a very viable alternative to reduce air travel. As I said, there is this survey that we would be very happy if your organization would also fill out. You can indicate which kind of measures you have already implemented, which will be implemented, or you have not yet considered. So, and as I said, it could also be some kind of guide for you to see what is possible, what concrete measures you could actually implement. And everyone who filled in the survey will be featured on our grounded organizations part, where we already have some best practice examples that you can read about on the website. Yeah, we will have various guides that we will publish in the future, like best travel policy measures by zeroing flying, how to change the travel policy by ExPlane, how to arrange virtual meetings, and also PowerPoint presentations that you can use if you want to get active within your organization. So, and also webinars coming up in autumn. So if you want to stay informed, you can indicate it in the feedback form, or in the maybe you already had indicated it in the registration form. And also if you have our newsletter, you will get updates on that. Yeah, that's it from my side. And now we have already arrived at the final discussion round. And our question for you, all participants, would be now, what support would you actually need to get active within your organization? That's a very interesting question also for us, because we want to learn with you and we want to see how can we support you, but also to exchange a bit of experiences. And also if you have some additional remarks you want to make to the webinar, you're welcome to do that now. Thank you.
Hi, if I can chip in. This is Matt Watson from University of Sheffield. So first, thanks very much for organising, and thanks to all the presenters. It's been fantastic. It's probably quite a difficult thing to ask for, I realise. I'm really just interested if anybody has any evidence for the effectiveness of particular interventions. That's because I'm in the kind of happy position, I guess, that my university is committed to going carbon neutral as well, and I'm leading a group tasked with coming up with a pathway on travel to get it to carbon neutral. So there's kind of readiness to receive messages, but there's a clear desire to have evidence of the effectiveness of particular interventions, and it's increasingly easy to find loads of really good ideas for making changes, but finding any research or evidence on what's actually worked is proving difficult. So it'd be really great if there was some kind of forum for gathering that sort of evidence as it becomes available. Thanks.
This sounds like a good idea for a thesis research, be it PhD or master's. Any experiences so far? Matt is not the only one interested. Wolfram also highlighted the interest. Namrata.
Yeah, hi. First of all, I would like to thank you all for this awesome webinar. I would like to take up this question: which support do you need to get active? I'm from an organization called Sea Balance in India. So we work towards reducing or helping companies, people reduce carbon footprints as much as possible. So we have come up with a project called Fair Travel, where we realized that a lot of IT companies in India, travel is their major source of carbon production, and we want to get to these IT companies and help them out, frame their travel policies in such a way that they can reduce their carbon footprints. So regarding this project, we are looking for two things. One is, like we have discussed through the webinar, a lot of ideas on how to get these IT companies to fix up their travel policies in such a way that they can reduce the footprinting. And number two is we are looking for help in terms of funding to take up our project forward in India. So just wanted to answer this question of what is the support that we are looking for.
Thank you so much for pointing this out. Maybe you'll find partners here. I think there is definitely interest around in also research projects. Ours didn't get funded, but we're also always looking for partners for new proposals. I have a question from Günther Getzinger.
Yes, thank you also for great webinar. What I'm really looking for is as head of the mobility group of the Alliance of the Austrian Universities, Sustainable Universities, are, so to speak, the official internal documents of universities which regulate how to make a trip, how to travel. These are 3 pages or 5 pages where all these paragraphs are written down what you have to look at when you want to travel as an academic. And I'm sure those lighthouse universities we learned about today do have that documents where there is written there is no flight when there is the possibility to take a train which lasts 3 hours or 5 hours, or I've heard about 6 hours. So these very, very precise regulations, these kind of documents really would help, because in our discussions with the heads of the universities, they ask for examples how Bergen or Brussels or ETH Zurich are really doing it on the normative level, on the level of norms, of laws, internal laws, so to speak, in universities. So this would be very helpful. Maybe 3 or 5 of these documents could be sent out by you. Thank you very, very much again for your effort. It really was very fruitful. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
If you want to jump in here, actually you can already find links to actual travel policies on the Stay Grounded website for several universities, and we will expand this section surely. We will send you the link afterwards to that.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, from me, maybe it's going a bit towards the question of Matt as well, but for us, towards potential steps in the future, it could be interesting to see how our reduction targets are implemented at other universities, and if they work. So I don't know if there are examples of that.
I haven't come across many, but I think there are some. The difficulty is always that you have to have good monitoring to have reduction targets that you compare them to. I know that SEI, Stockholm Environment Institute, for example, has that. But we will share those resources as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Michaela, how are we doing on time?
We still have 4 minutes to go, or 2 minutes for discussion, and then.
So we have time for 1 or maybe 2 short questions, or 1 longer one, if anybody would like to comment or ask for something. Now's the time. Otherwise, I'm extremely pleased how well we are keeping time. Oh, that was a long post in the group chat. Okay. But I think it's time to close. to close on time. I think that's good for our image and any future webinars we will organize. So Michaela, maybe you have some final words for us.
Yes, so thank you very much that you all joined this webinar. There were so many. It's really encouraging for us to see how many people participated, and also the lively discussion. And I hope that the different perspectives you just heard on this topic were also inspiring and helpful for you. Of course, we're always open for any feedback you have, any hints you have, and we try to react and include it also on our website. There will also be further webinars, as I said, so I encourage you to sign up to the newsletter to stay informed. I think that's it from me. Thank you very much also to our speakers who have made these interesting inputs. I wish you all a very nice evening and stay grounded.